Hey everybody, it's Willow from Out Center. I am here today to talk about a brand new content series that we are calling the Advocate Oasis. Look, at the beginning of this year, we had talked about the need to stay strong and stay connected as a community, especially as we're building content and education and activation materials on the subject that we're calling the Protocol for an Inclusive Future. Now, that protocol means that we have to have enough of a mindset, enough knowledge about what it takes to affect change and affect change in a world that is being negatively affected by this worldview that we're calling the unholy trinity, this worldview that is informed by and built upon white supremacy, toxic masculinity, and of course, Christian nationalism. See, so much of the problems that we're seeing at the federal level and at the local level have to do with the invocations of the ideals of these worldviews that shut people out. And we know that that's just no good. But we have to not only combat those things, but we also have to present a vision for this world that is able to be more attractive in of itself. It's not just saying no to a bad thing. It's about saying yes to a good thing. And we believe that this protocol that we are introducing is one that can affect change at a very small local level, but also be broadened out to affect our cities, our state, and hopefully, of course, our country and the world. Now, of course, that means that we will be creating and sharing very practical, tactile, get in the weeds sorts of resources. So you'll see a lot of that coming in the future. You'll learn how to present a public comment at something like a city commission meeting or at a school board meeting. We'll give you informations about how to create protests safely and effectively. We've got so much more coming down the pipeline. And we also want to ensure that while we can engage in those sorts of actions and be activated for those sorts of direct things, we also wanted to create some content and material that's focused on the internal aspect of our work. And that's where we're launching this new content stream called the Advocate Oasis. And that really indicates to you what it's about. So on one side, we've got to be out there and we've got to be activated, but we also have to know when to take a break and look inwards and make sure that we are caring for ourselves. And not caring for ourselves in a very sort of get everything else out of the way, shut yourself in, individualistic way. So we want to break down some of the negativities of the hyper-individualized worldview that surround us, the hyper-consumeristic worldview that's around us. And so, yes, while I say the word internal as a way of thinking about the focus of these Advocate Oasis materials, don't think of this as just something that you do to the exclusion of others and your community, your families, chosen or otherwise. Think of it as a way of just spending time with yourself and with those closest to you. So that way you can recharge and have the energy that you need to keep going in what will be something more like a marathon rather than a sprint. So let's talk a little bit then. Let's talk about finding a little bit of an oasis. And today what I wanted to talk about is how we can have a restful rebellion against these negative worldviews that are around us. Like I said, so much of what's going on around us is rooted in a very dangerous and damaging individualistic worldview. That's a lot of syllables. So let me explain that. An individualistic worldview is one that is very focused on the self, the individual, to the exclusion of others. I mean, here's a very top of mind example. How much damage is being done at the federal level in the name of efficiency, right? You've got folks who are cutting budget for cancer research and medical care in the name of that so-called efficiency, in the name of saving cash and making money. Is making money more important than safety, than healthcare, than research? Look, we're well-formed enough in our consciences to know that that's not the case. But I want us to take that extreme example and think about how it can affect our own closer to home sorts of views of the world. How much of our time and energy is focused on getting to the next thing, point A to point B to point C. The more important things, and yeah, maybe that's a bit controversial, but it's more important to take some time away from the kind of vision of the world that is all about increasing efficiency, productivity, the end goal, especially when that sort of worldview is willing to throw senior citizens and veterans who need mental health care, and of course, LGBT people under the bus for the sake of increasing profits. So what do we do then? How do we restfully rebel against that way of thinking? Well, I want to posit something even more controversial. One of the best ways that we can rebel is to simply rest. What do I mean by that? Well, see, if the world that we are in is so focused on draining every little bit of efficiency out of the world around us through sometimes very horrifying and dehumanizing ways, we know of these factories that are out there for shipping and receiving that prevent workers from being able to take breaks while on the clocks. That's not just. That's something that's bad for the world, bad for people, bad for our communities, bad for humans. We think about a world in which folks can't use their pronouns, their chosen names. That's not good for the world. We think about, like I've mentioned, this unholy trinity. All of these things that are so focused on creating a supremacy of a vision of the world that puts other people down, that makes other people less important. Queer people are not as important as straight people. Folks who believe any other religion outside of a very oppressive form of Christianity, those aren't good. A kind of vision that says women shouldn't be allowed to vote or have jobs outside of the home, right? These are worldviews that are just so focused on gaining against and over other people. And that's what I'm thinking about, more so than just these extreme versions of efficiency. I'm thinking also in the everyday forms of exploitation that have become so familiar to us we don't even recognize them. So, if it's hard to recognize these things, how do I combat them? Like I said, that's where rest comes in. In a world that is so focused on creating useful things and only being useful, I think a very, very good form of rebellion against that is to focus on useless things, and useless in air quotes there, right? Because I think that the most useless things are actually the most helpful and most human and most valuable things. Think about this. In the name of so-called efficiency, we're seeing losses to the funding and support of our national parks. Somebody might say, well, isn't it better for us to have these giant government contracts that can grow the economy over and against what? Trees? Do we really need those big parks with all of those people talking about, I don't know, topics like climate change? And you hear people talk this way. But I want you to think about how foundational it is to have that quote unquote useless opportunity to go spend time in nature, to smell the grass, to encounter wildlife, to go camping and look up and see the stars, right? Yeah, maybe going outside and looking at the stars isn't increasing the value for the world's richest people. Maybe walking on a not so well-trodden path in the middle of a trail across Michigan isn't standing with a sign in protest, which is a good thing, by the way. But I think what's important for us to realize is that recharging that can happen while we're focused on these things that don't, provide efficiency or productivity can actually help us recenter who we are and what we're meant to be in the world. I know that that's challenging, but sometimes because of how powerful those hyper-efficiency, hyper-consumeristic, hyper-individual messages, how often those things come to us through advertising, through TikTok, through what we're seeing other people wear, sometimes the best way to reset is just to get away from all of that and just find out who we're meant to be kind of in the wild world all around us. Now, one thing, like I said, I wanted to point out as well, and this might be a little bit challenging, but just know that I think it's important to bring up, because those of us who don't come from very individualized Western cultures, European cultures, those cultures that for so many centuries and years have been focused on individuals making their own way in the world and pulling themselves up by their bootstraps. Other cultures, indigenous ones, non-European ones, have often realized that personal growth isn't just one single person. Personal growth happens in the context of community. Again, this will sound a little bit challenging, but I think it's important for us to hear from those who aren't, say, coming from this individual Western worldview. Maybe you've heard the phrase something like, if you don't fill up your own cup, you won't have anything else to pour out for others. I think this is a little bit too individualistically focused, because in other cultures, ones that aren't so driven by the individual impulse, in those other cultures, people think of it this way. It's not as if the cup is just we might say a zero-sum game. It isn't like you empty the cup and now it's all gone for good. Rather, it's more like a lake, an ocean that you're drawing from. Now, you can borrow from this lake with your own vessel, with your own cup and things like that, but you've always got this lake to come back to pull and draw water from. So guess what? Even if you pour out and you're empty, you still have this central part of your ecology, this lake to go to and pull from. That when you pour out your cup, there's this amazing thing that happens in the world where the water that you've poured out comes back up into the sky and gets rained down back in this lake. So again, there's nothing wrong with thinking about filling your own cup up. That's great if something like a motivational talk gives you that kind of perspective. But I also want us to check the fact that sometimes that thinking can be related to the same impulses that are driving us to cancel medical care for folks. Efficiency isn't the end goal. Sometimes spending time in the useless can be good. I wanted to leave us with that challenge because I think it can be so easy to just point fingers at these so obviously bad things out there that we forget to look inwards. And so I feel comfortable bringing up this challenge that comes from non-dominant culture viewpoints because I think it helps us stay humble in our own heads and our own hearts. And I think that challenge can help us spend time with others, thinking through others. Now, protect yourself if you're an introvert, right? Don't think that that means you've got to have a dinner party every night. But spend time in activities that involve thinking of others and putting them top of mind. For instance, if the dinner parties aren't your thing, maybe write handwritten notes. Those take time, right? And they're also, again, big air quotes here, useless activities. But think of how much value and love that's shared when you receive a handwritten note in the mail. That practice, that muscle memory that's built for the minutes or perhaps even hours it takes to write a note with another person in mind is good practice. And again, a good restful revolt against all of the nasty things that are in our world today that are causing us to put the human thing second. So don't do that. Spend time in an oasis of caring for other people first. Spend time breathing. Spend time caring for yourself and the community that you find yourself in.